Alright, so I just got back from the ironing board, and what I did was I just pressed all these seam allowances towards the facing. I also pressed that along the center front. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start at the center back of this bodice, and I'm going to do that row of understitching, connecting all of these seam allowances to the facing unit. And again, just to kind of help you out where I'm going to be stitching at. Whoop, the pin just flew at me. I'm going to be stitching about 1/8 of an inch away from that seam line, and placing a row of stitching just inside of that seam line on the facing piece to hold all of the seam allowances that I've sewn into place. And as I stitch, I want to make sure that my my seam is being kind of pulled open so that I don't have any strange or weird folds that occur along this seam. So I'm going to go slow, and I'm going to start, again, I'm starting at the center back, and I'm going to do some back tacking to go ahead and start this off. And I'm just going to continue along that line. I'm making sure that I can see my seam line through that oval in the presser foot. And as I work around that curve, I want to just make sure that I'm holding that seam open as best that I can, going as slow as I need to. And as I approach kind of those curves, I want to stop when I need and reposition if I need to do any of that. Just follow that seam all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and stop, making sure my needle's in the down position just to give myself a quick check. Make sure that all of my seam allowances are still pressed towards the facing piece, which they are. But it's always a good idea just to stop every now and then and check. And I'm just going to continue stitching all along this all along this seam line, doing this understitching row. Excuse me, sorry about that. And what I'm doing is I'm going to be approaching that point at center front pretty soon. And it's going to be difficult to get all up into that pointed area. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to just sew until you can't sew any closer, and then stop. So I'm probably going to be stopping, oops, my foot pedal is messed up. I'm going to be stopping about where my, my collar connects. Then I'm just going to raise up my needle, and I'm going to pull those thread tails to the back side and go ahead and tie that off. Hopefully I stopped in time. So again, I just gave that thread tail a quick tug, and I pulled those thread tails to the back side, and I'm just going to tie those off real quick. I'm going to take a needle to help me tie that knot, and if you haven't mastered this this knot tying yet, please let me know, because this is something that will really help you in future classes, is to have a good to be able to tie that knot closely. Alright, now when we get to this corner here, right where I stopped, I need to come back and again trim and taper that. So I'm just going to cut off the top of that, that triangle piece, and then taper back my seam allowances along that center front. Probably should have done that just a moment before I started doing understitching, but we stopped in time to be able to get there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open that back up, and I'm just going to continue that stitch line. If you want to start at the bottom and work back up towards that that center front point, that's fine. Maybe that's what I'll do. So again, just make sure that your seam allowances are pointed towards the facing, and we're going to be working from the bottom to the top, or at least that's what I'm going to be doing. If you want to continue working in the direction that you were, that's completely fine. I'm going to do some quick back tacking, and then just sew right up this center front line. And again, I want to make sure that this seam is being held open while I do this understitching. And as I approach this corner point, again, I want to try to just manipulate my fabric to make sure that the seam is going to be staying as open as possible. And when I can't really see what I'm doing anymore, I'm going to stop and pull those thread tails to the back side. Oops, sorry. Bumped the camera with my elbow. And I'm just going to pull on that thread tail again to get that front side of the fabric, so my my red thread to pop to the back, and then I'm just going to tie off that knot. Okay. Alright, I'm using that needle and giving myself a good knot there. I'm trimming that thread tail, and I need to go back to where I started at center back and trim those thread tails, and again at center front and do the same thing. Okay, then what I want to do is I just want to flip everything to the right side, so I'm going to put my thumbs inside and flip this corner out, which is at center front, and I'm going to take my scissor and then come in from the inside and just gently poke that point out so I can have a good shape going on there. Alright, so then we have the center front all finished off, and this is where you could put your buttonholes or your buttons, depending on which crossover you have, probably your buttonholes on this side, and then you know, the other side of our bodice, which we didn't do, would sit underneath of it and have the button. So this facing will then fold to the inside, and then our roll collar will gently roll back as it should. So what you can do is you can usually use like if there's a certain collar roll or like a height that you want to meet on your roll collar, you can sometimes really steam that into place. But because we're only doing a half of a bodice, it is a little bit more difficult to kind of get that the finished, I guess, the whole idea of having this whole finished collar around a circular area. But that's how ideally you would want that collar to roll. And so we're almost done. We just need to do a row of stay stitching along our armhole here. So let's go ahead and just make sure everything's out of the way, laying it flat. Let's do a row of stay stitching around our armhole. Make sure that as you go here around everything that you make sure that your seam allowance is around your along your shoulder seam. So right here, that those are laid flat as you go to stitch over them. And I think I'm sewing this about at a 1/4 inch. We're just doing this row of stay stitching. That's mainly there to just help keep shape. So we've done that. And I want to trim my thread tails. Now our last step here is that we just need to sew up our side seam, so the seam that goes underneath of our armhole. So with right sides together, we're just going to put a couple pins in to keep everything straight, and we're just going to seam up this underarm area. So we're going to run that 5/8 of an inch, do a back tack at the front and back, and then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to press that open. And I'm going to show you a different technique that you can do to, what we also need to do is we need to come back in and make sure that this facing is going to lay flat, so it's not going to move around. You can do a hand sewing tack, like, and make that X, or what you can do is you can actually just pin this down on the inside, and you can stitch right through all the layers from the top side. That's what I've done on some of my projects in the past. So I have this all laying flat, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in from the top area where the collar meets, and I'm just going to go straight through, kind of like that stitch in the ditch concept of stitching everything right through that seam. Like, I don't want this row of stitching to be seen at all. So I really want to try to hold this seam open while I do this stitching, and hopefully none of it will be seen on the top side. You can also do this with a hand sewing needle. Alright, and when I'm done, I want to just pull out some thread tails, give myself some long ones, because what I need to do, and hopefully you can see that, I just went right through those seams, holding everything in place. And then again, what I want to do is I want to tie a knot on these on the back. And I'm going to want to do that for both. I didn't want to do back stitching because, you know, when you're kind of in this delicate space, you don't want any extra stitching to show on the front side. So I'm just going to go ahead and tie off these knots. And if you want to, you can go ahead and use the hand sewing X like we did in the previous sample, or you can try this new one. We just want to make sure that that facing isn't going to kind of just flop around like we don't want, we just don't want it to kind of flop to the visible side of the garment. So then when I get those tied, I'm just going to trim off my thread tails and be good. So from the front here, this is our center front, and then this collar just gently rolls over. And all of this is just really the rise and the fall of your collar is really dependent upon the pattern. So as some of you guys advance onto your pattern making classes, you'll probably discuss how to shape a collar and to get the rise and fall that you want. So just make sure that you go ahead and label this rolled collar and place it in your binder.